Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Souvik Chakraborty. I will be a discussant and host for this session today. Welcome to the third webinar of the Development Studies Association of Australia's webinar series. If you have not watched the two earlier sessions in this series, then I would kindly request you to go to our YouTube page to check the recordings. If you all have not followed us on social media, then please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you want to get associated with DSAA, then kindly consider being a member of DSAA. Please check our official website for more details. Before we get on to the discussion today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I pay my respects to the elders past and present. I recognize their connection to country and role in caring for and maintaining country over thousands of years. Our guest today, Ms. Elena Robertson, is a senior consultant in Clear Horizons International Team. Elena has a Master of Development Studies from the University of Melbourne and a Bachelor of Arts in Diplomacy and World Affairs from Occidental College, Los Angeles, USA. Elena has more than a decade of experience working in international development and gender equity with a focus on action research, evaluation, multi-stakeholder program management, and evidence-driven policy. In 2024, Elena was the subject coordinator for monitoring evaluation in development studies as a part of the Master of Development Studies at University of Melbourne. Elena's mixed methods approach to evaluation and measurement is rooted in her training as a developmental researcher. When she isn't working, Elena can be found planning or in the midst of a multi-day trek, swimming, knitting, or enjoying an oat latte and a good book. Welcome, Elena, to our webinar series. Thanks for accepting our request to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, few housekeeping rules. This session is being hosted on Zoom. So yeah, like you can ask any questions once our conversation is over. So we shared a QR code before. So a lot of you have asked questions through that QR code, and we have all compiled those questions in our questionnaire today. So we will be covering those questions. On top of that, if you have any questions, feel free to write your questions in the chat box. So we would try to cover it up within this conversation today. Earlier this week, Elena, Clear Horizon profiled you in the newsletter. I saw an interesting quote out there. I took an elective on monitoring and evaluation. I was obsessed. I was so excited to discover there was a name for the thing I wanted to do, unquote. Elena, please tell me about your professional trajectory in Australia. We would like to know more about your journey from being a student to a working professional in the monitoring, evaluation, and learning space.
Yes, absolutely. So first, I would like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that I'm coming to from. I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this land has never been ceded. I am from the US, and I immigrated to Australia in 2016 to do my Master's of Development Studies. I had spent the 2 years before that working in Cambodia at the Angkor Hospital for Children, and 1 year before that working in the Mekong Delta region of Vietnam. So I spent 3 years working before moving to Australia. Back then, M&E was an elective, and I took it in my first semester, which, if any of you have taken M&E, you will know that it is very advantageous to take it after project management, which I did not do. And I was enthralled with M&E as a concept because I loved the idea of finding out whether a program was working, why or why it wasn't, what else was happening, and then getting the opportunity to ask people their thoughts and feelings about the program. So I knew I wanted to work in MEL from basically day one of the subject, but getting a job in MEL is really hard, and it has taken me 8 years from when I graduated in 2018 until January of this year to get a substantive MEL role. I've applied for a lot of roles. I think this was the third role that I'd applied for at Clear Horizon, and this was the first real MEL role that I had gotten. I knew that I loved research for the same reasons I love MEL. And so while I was a student, undertook a lot of unpaid internships to do kind of research policy, data analysis work. And I also had several different casual research assistant roles at the University of Melbourne, which were paid, but they were not at all related to my area of study. So I worked in the School of Information Sciences on some virtual reality projects doing qualitative data analysis. And I think so my career has been pretty winding, but the thread that has gone through it is it's always really focused on qualitative data. And that means that I'm very good at building research tools. So surveys, interview questions, I'm a skilled facilitator. I'm very comfortable talking to people to understand how things are going for them. I'm able to create trusting and open environments. I think a lot of that comes from the type of relatively casual person that I am. And so over the last 8 years, I knew I basically wanted to work for Clear Horizon. There were a few other places I wanted to work for, but I knew Clear Horizon was where I really wanted to work. So I've worked a lot of multiple jobs. And my goal for 2025 is to work only one job because I am a very ambitious person. And so even when I've had full-time roles, like in 2024, I was working as a senior policy officer at the Council to Homeless Persons, where I was managing an action research project looking at family violence and homelessness. But I reached out to a former professor to ask about doing some casual tutoring in development studies because I thought that sounded fun. And then that is what snowballed into me coordinating M&E at the University of Melbourne. And so I then was working multiple jobs again. I didn't need to financially, but I really wanted to because I wanted the experience of working in MEL. And that's been a theme throughout my career. I've often taken on additional part-time work just to be able to have something on my CV or because I find it really interesting. I undertook a remote placement through the Australia Volunteers program almost immediately after I was eligible during COVID as a MEL mentor for the Sexual Violence Research Initiative. And I've been able to kind of build those MEL skills along with my research policy and advocacy jobs because I've been willing to take on those additional hours and those additional roles. But 2025 is the year of only one job, is what I'm manifesting for myself.
That's amazing, Elena, what you have achieved and what you have done over all these years, and the like the projects that you have taken while you were studying. I think uh, that always helps you. I will come to that question later on. It's in my list. It's a very important question and the point that you have touched on. As an international student, how easy or difficult was it to get a job after your master's? Any practical tips or suggestions for students who are currently pursuing Masters of Development Studies?
Um, I was able to get casual research work through persistence. I think probably some of my professors might remember me emailing them probably too frequently to ask if they needed an RA or if they knew anyone who needed an RA. And so that was what financially supported me. And then I did an unpaid internship at the International Women's Development Agency, and through that found out about a part-time job opening and successfully applied for that role. And for about 18 months, worked as an RA and at IWDA. So I don't want to say it was easy to find a role because there have been periods where it's felt impossible and it's been incredibly discouraging. But I have usually been able to find part-time work that is in some way relevant to what I want to do. I was eligible for a post-study visa, which makes a huge difference because you're not tied to an employer, but that is not a visa pathway that's available for everyone. So I really had that privilege and actually decided to extend my development studies by a semester so that I would be eligible for that visa. And then I've worked, I wanted to work in international development. It was something I've known since I was very young. I had some really incredible roles. And then in 2021, in the depths of COVID, I was working with EdgeEffect, which is a small organization focusing on LGBT inclusion, specifically in the humanitarian system. And unfortunately, because of shifts in development aid, we were no longer able to have staff, essentially. And so I had to leave the development sector. There were no jobs, as some of you may recall. And so I pivoted to family violence. And it was in medicine, it was very easy to get a family violence job. I'm a big spreadsheet gal, and I think I interviewed for 4 family violence jobs and was offered 3. And that's really different to when I was unemployed mid-year this year, because I had come back, or I suppose mid-year last year. I wrapped up like a year's travel, and I applied to 30 jobs, and it was very difficult. So it really depends on the job environment, the sector you're looking in. And that was looking at policy, kind of all types, not just family violence, not just development work. So I've had periods where it was easy to get a job and periods where I felt like it was never going to happen, but it has always panned out. Did you ask about the skills to look for?
Any practical tips or suggestions for students who are currently pursuing Masters of Development Studies?
Yeah, I mean, the practical tips I have are to come to things like this and to follow up with people who speak at things like this. A lot of the roles that I got early on were because I followed up with a guest speaker who came to one of my lectures, or I followed up with a connection that an acquaintance had, like I found out about EdgeEffect, for instance, because someone that I kind of knew through a friend told me about their work, and I just emailed them. I've gotten some part-time consulting roles because they looked at my LinkedIn and I emailed them and was like, I like your work. I want to be part of it. And so building that confidence and knowing how to sell yourself, which, you know, is icky, but no one's going to advocate for you really except for yourself. Being able to clearly articulate your values and how that aligns with the place you want to work and with your skill set is really important. It's not really obvious how working in family violence policy translates into working as a senior consultant in an international MEL team, but it does. Those are very transferable skills, but you need to be able to explain why those skills are transferable. And that means like doing boring stuff, like writing it down, practicing. I do a lot of interview practice. I am a copious note taker, even when I absolutely don't need to be taking notes, but it really helps me think and process information. So the practical skills you need for job seeking are being willing to put yourself out there, even though for me, it's so cringe and quite embarrassing, and I don't love it, but it really can pay off if you're able to make those connections, because people remember what it's like to be a student, to be looking into the world and trying to find your place, and people generally want to be helpful.
Some excellent insights, Elena. I think that will be very helpful for the aspiring students, who wants to get a job after their masters. Even I felt the same, and I said the same things when I was directing a master's program in Australia to my students, that don't ignore the power of networking. And I always mention to my students that, and I also follow this approach, that people can't read your minds. Just approach them. There are a lot of kind souls around you. If you share a problem, they will help you out. They will create opportunities for you so that you can gain that experience, right? It happened with me several times in my life. So I'm a great believer of that. Thank you, Elena, for touching on this point. Any specific tips or suggestions you have for students to showcase transferable skill sets while applying for jobs in the international development sector or in the MEL space, Elena?
So in the MEL space, some of the best transferable skills are critical thinking and research. If you know how to do, I'm a qualitative researcher, but I can do some very basic Excel quant analysis. So being able to articulate how that comes across. Someone in the chat has asked, how do you talk about your accomplishments without boasting? And you have to boast. And this is probably because I'm from the US. We're famously very self-absorbed and a boastful people. And that really does work out in my favor because I'm okay with talking about the things that I'm good at because, as Souvik just said, no one is going to read your mind. No one is going to go out on a limb to try to understand why managing a national policy and research team like I did is relevant to working on a 10-year DFAT-funded aid platform. That's not a leap people are going to try to make themselves, so you have to explain why that's relevant. And for me, it's I know how to design research tools. I know how to critically think. I know how to look between the lines. So qualitative research, that means doing interviews. It means designing surveys. It means a lot of data analysis. It means listening to the information that people are providing you and being aware of the context that they're coming from. So a recent example of this is that I've been managing a homelessness and family violence project. I spoke with people who work in both sectors, and I spoke with women who have experienced homelessness as a result of men's family violence. I did 17 consultations across Victoria, in person and online, and I had huge quantities of qualitative data from those focus groups to analyze. I read through them. I thought back to the way that people were in the focus groups and really thought about what are the themes that I'm hearing. So yes, one of the themes is obvious things like there's no housing. Like you can't provide crisis accommodation if there's no housing for people to move into after. But also one of the themes that came out without ever being explicitly named is that people who go through the services want more and deserve more transparency. So you might find out that you're eligible for a certain type of funding, but you don't know how much funding that is. You don't know the time frame you have to use it in. So listening to what people are telling you and being able to draw out those themes, that's what qualitative research is about. And that is relevant for a MEL project, it's relevant for an academic research project, and then being able to explore how you'll bring those skills into a MEL-focused role, even if you don't have that MEL experience, is really important. Project management, theory of change, and knowing the basics of building a MEL plan are also all obviously very important for working in MEL.
Thank you, Elena. There is a follow-up question from Ruanan. I think I should ask this now. How do you demonstrate those transferable skills? Can you provide examples such as qualitative research skills, communication skills? How do you demonstrate that?
I think I've spoken a little bit about qualitative research skills, but communication. So a lot of key selection criteria might have something like excellent communication skills, excellent cross-cultural communication skills. And so for me, because I mostly communicate through writing, like I write a lot of reports, I would talk about the variety of reports that I've written. So I would reference the fact that I have written one-page policy briefings for ministers on X, Y, and Z. But I've also written, 112-page report on homelessness and family violence. So good communication often means knowing how to tailor what you're saying and how you're saying it to your audience. You all, as students, would have a lot of experience doing that because you write academic papers, but you also might have to give presentations in some classes. You also might be designing research tools. Maybe you've written articles for the DSAA or for other nonprofit organizations. So being able to explain how your communication skills show up and being really good at STAR responses, which is situation, task, action, result. So that would be something like, I was asked to provide the minister a briefing on non-fatal strangulation in Victoria. I quickly did research across legislative changes in the last 5 years, compared legislation across the states and territories, and wrote a one-page brief with 17 bullet points that were most important. As a result, the minister went into a meeting and advocated for our position on non-fatal strangulation, which was X, Y, and Z. So that's an example of you were asked to do something, what you did, and the result of that thing.
Thank you, Elena. The importance of STAR is super important in Australia, in the Australian context. Ronan, there is another question you have asked, especially in writing cover letters. How do you manage to deliver those skills in a concise way? I think Elena has covered everything. If I can add one point there, whatever work you're doing, take a note in your diary or on a Word doc what exactly you're doing in your portfolio, because on a daily basis we do a lot of stuff which we don't remember after 1 year or 2 year, and those all add up. And try to quantify those when you're writing your CV. It actually helps to build up your CV. So I will move on to the next question, Elena. Um, you have worked in various organizations in various capacities. That's what you have mentioned. What made you choose the MEL sector as your profession, other than your love for research?
Um, I think I've definitely said this in M&E last semester, but I am a very curious slash nosy person, and Mel is kind of like professional nosiness. It's like you're trying to find out what's happening, who's doing what, why they're doing it, if it's working, if people like it, what's the vibe. Um, and it just seemed fun and interesting. I liked it. And I think part of it is because I believe in development as a concept from an equity perspective and a justice perspective, but I don't necessarily believe that the way development works as a sector is effective. And I wanted to have a role. The reason I wanted to do MEL and not just research is because I wanted to have a role that was basically pointing out the holes in what development as a practice was doing, and then being part of the people who actually take steps to make that better. That's one of the kind of unexpected opportunities I have in my new role, because I am working on these huge aid platforms. All the projects I'm on are for 5 to 9 years. And that means that when we find out problems through MEL, we can actually change the program because we have like a decade, and we have those levers. It's different if you're working on a 6-month program evaluation where the funding's wrapped up, changes can't be implemented. But I really wanted to work in MEL because I wanted to find the holes and I wanted to find the problems so that me or people who are more qualified than I can make recommendations and then actually fix it. Because I'm a very values-driven person, and I can't be part of something that I don't believe in is being effective from, MEL is monitoring, evaluation, and learning, or measurement, evaluation, learning, depending on who you ask. And yeah, so I really wanted to be kind of the people who are finding the problems, but also making very specific recommendations on how to improve things.
Thank you, Elena. Elena, give us a sneak peek on, like, how does your day look like in your office as a MEL professional? You wanted this job for a long time. Now you have a
Yes.
job in clear horizon as a senior consultant. How does your day look like?
So because I'm very new, I only started at Clear Horizon about a month ago. I'm doing a lot of learning, and something that I hadn't expected, and this is again unique to Australia, and I suppose all the places that DFAT funds, is our aid programs are, as you would presumably know through development studies, basically implemented through managing contractors, through aid facilities or platforms, depending on who branded it. And that means I'm working on these very large long-term projects. That means there's a lot of background documentation for me to go through. So I'm working on a project in Papua New Guinea that is in its 17th year. And that means there are a lot of years of background reading to do. So on a day-to-day basis, I am emailing with our clients, which is usually the in-country technical MEL expert who works for the managing contractor, but is most of the managing contractor staff that I work with are local from the place where they are working or from the region. Working with them on reporting. So we have mid-year reporting, which happens now-ish, and end of financial year reporting, which is in June, July, August-ish. So emailing with people, reviewing presentations to DFAT, reviewing mid-year reporting. Those are for the projects that are kind of just chugging along. They've been going for a couple of years. I'm working on some projects that are in more of the inception and mobilization phase, including one in Fiji. And so that means supporting the in-country team to prepare for some theory of change workshops. That means reading a lot of documentation to see what did DFAT envision for this aid platform, what are our contractual obligations, when do we have to fulfill them by, what types of programs are we working on. So it could be health, governance, gender equity, and infrastructure. These aid platforms often manage very large portions of aid. So it's not just for a couple of organizations. It's for like most of the aid. So they're very big platforms across a lot of different sectors. So I have to pretty quickly learn about all of that, including maritime, aviation, and road infrastructure, which are some areas I've never worked on.
That's super interesting. Okay, we will skip some questions so that we can accommodate all the questions from audience, which are already there in my list. So I know, like you have mentioned, that you have worked in various organizations and you've done research work in various capacities, So can you share some example where data analysis led to a major change in a program?
Yeah, so this is actually from before I did my master's. I worked at the Encore Hospital for Children, where I was a development officer, which meant I basically applied for grants, wrote donor reports, did some donor-facing work, but a lot of my job was applying for grants and reporting to donors at this philanthropically run hospital, or I suppose nonprofit hospital. We had a lot of different types of donors. And this is an example that I wasn't actually involved in the data analysis for this, but one of the things that we provided in CMREAP was free antiretroviral therapy for all children who were HIV positive. This was more than 10 years ago, and cell phones were not as ubiquitous as they now are. But we knew that one of the reasons children with HIV were developing AIDS was because they weren't getting their ARTs basically correctly, because you have to provide ART dosages on a pretty strict schedule. And so these were children from essentially anywhere across Cambodia. The doctors kind of talked to families to be like, what's going on? You have the free medication. We've provided you information on how to give the medication. Why isn't it being administered correctly? And over time, and by doing data analysis of talking with these families and caregivers, it became clear that the medication was not being administered on a time schedule. So you need to administer dosages maybe every 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, because people didn't have, that's not how they lived. They didn't have a clock telling them what time it was or timers going off. So we started doing more holistic outreach programs, both for children who are HIV positive, but for other issues as well. And part of that was actually providing clocks and working with families so that they would understand you need to provide this medication every time the clock says 6 a.m. or whatever, or 6 p.m. And that sounds, I don't know, it sounds kind of like a silly or a fake example, but that's the type of thing you learn through qualitative data analysis. If you don't ask people why, you can't say, why are you doing this wrong? You need to understand, like, no one's trying to administer life-saving medication incorrectly. And this goes for a lot of things. So that comes from sitting down and listening to people to understand what are the barriers to you being able to provide this medication appropriately, given your context and where you live and your lifestyle and what you have access to. And so as a result, if new patients come in, their families are asked about, like, what timekeeping facilities do you have? Now everyone has a cell phone, so it's much easier, but that wasn't the case 10 years ago. And so now there's nutrition information, there's outreach visits, food aid is provided in addition. So it's really listening to people and understanding who they are as a whole person, and not just focusing on, you're bad at giving this medication every 12 hours, but understanding what's going into this. And that's what data analysis is. It's just listening and figuring out what people are trying to tell you, even if they're not explicitly saying it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elena, for your insightful response. I know like you work in a very big organization, Elena, and you, as you mentioned, that you all do monitoring and evaluation work in other country context as well. So I couldn't resist myself from asking this question, like, what are the best ways to ensure stakeholder engagement in the M&E process and place-based initiatives, especially when you work in this kind of situation? You're based in Australia, you're probably designing an M&E framework sitting in Australia, and then you visit after 2 months. It may happen, right? It might not. It may happen as well. So how do you engage with the stakeholders during that phase?
This is because of the design of the projects that we work on. So if you are putting forward a bid to manage a large DFAT aid platform, you have to have a technical M&E consultancy as part of it. There needs to be the managing contractor. So the managing contractor, they're like the big boss of us. We're the technical experts for MEL. And then you will, for the projects that I work on, you have local kind of like cultural technical expert consultancies, essentially. So in Fiji, there's one of the consultancies we work with is called Talanoa Consulting, and their sole focus is embedding culturally appropriate, culturally relevant approaches in projects like this. Also, most of the people that we work with who work for the managing contractor for this Fiji project are Fijian. There are some aspects, because we're doing this very bird's eye view level of MEL, making sure that culturally appropriate approaches are embedded. So in Fiji, that means Talanoa as a form of kind of challenge, not challenge, I don't want to say challenging like bad, but a space to have honest, challenging conversations that is facilitated in a specific way. I'm not facilitating that. Someone from Talanoa is facilitating that. A lot of it comes back to the principles of good MEL. Where are you asking people questions? Is it accessible? Is it friendly? Is it comfortable? Who's asking them the questions? I'm not the person who's going to Fiji to do interviews with the people who are participating in infrastructure development projects, because that's not A, my job, B, not what I'm meant to be doing. So Clear Horizon has, kind of changing gears, Clear Horizon has 3 branches. I'm in the international team. We also have the Sustainable Futures team, which works on mostly sustainability projects, and the social impact team. The Sustainable Futures team does pretty much all place-based initiatives around Australia. And for them, that means spending quite a lot of time in those places, working with people who are already doing that programmatic work, even if it's, just a community-led group that's not funded, but it's working with people who are already there and learning from them on how to ask questions, who to ask questions of, and thinking about, if we follow that, will it replicate power structures or will it challenge power structures? Will we learn something new from someone new? So I think that is, no matter where you're working, you have to think about power and have to think about who you're talking to and how you're talking to them. I think that's it. And being really mindful. Like, I get things wrong a lot in every job I've had, and I would much rather have someone tell me that I've done something incorrectly than not tell me. This, I think, comes back to the kind of, my personality is pretty casual and open, and trying to create a trusting relationship so that if someone needs to tell me they don't like what I've done or how I've done it, it's fine. It's not the end of my world. I'm a person. I make mistakes all the time. We all make mistakes all the time. And finding a way to create that environment where people can tell you that is really important.
It's a very interesting and important point, Elena, because in the MEL space, I think self-reflection also plays a very important role, because we are not perfect individuals, right? We may create something, some framework which doesn't work on field. So always reflect and evolve. I think that's a part of the journey. It's not a destination. MEL is not a destination. It's all about enjoying the journey, right? So thanks for giving a sneak peek to your world. Considering the current scenario, what is going on globally, what is the future of MEL? What are your thoughts on it, Elena? Especially when the donor agencies are reducing the funding globally, what's your take on it?
I think it's a really hard question, and I don't have an answer. If I did,
Mm,
I'd be the big boss of the world, I guess. But as governments reduce their aid budgets, they will be more interested in demonstrating value for money, and that generally means quantitative change. That means there will be a pullback from the complex social change that many of us work on in development. There's obviously going to be USAID essentially does not exist. That has huge impacts, women's rights, rights for queer people around the world, huge impacts on humanitarian aid. The list goes on. We've all seen the 27,000 LinkedIn articles. So the future of MEL is incredibly tied to whoever is providing you funding, as it always is. Being able to articulate value for money for quite complex change will be really important. And being able to explain why the winding path to social change is still worth funding. It's much
mm,
easier to build a road than
mm,
it is to build a road, but also make sure that women and people with disabilities have a chance to be involved in determining where that road goes and get the benefits from working on the road construction. Doing infrastructure projects is important, but you also need to be strengthening the systems that are guiding those projects. The retraction of aid funding the consequences cannot be overstated. I think a lot of other people who are much better placed to speak on this than I am have written some really brilliant things about what that means for us thinking about development as a practice. I love post-development theory, and this is it, baby. We're in it. So thinking about Mel and thinking like one of the things I come back to, in part because I listen to a lot of podcasts on it, is what's the point of Mel? Am I doing
mm,
capacity building for people so that they can like put data into a little Excel spreadsheet so they can report back to DFAT? Because is that's that's making them good at reporting. That's not necessarily a skill that is promoting justice, equity, environmental conservation, and stewardship. I don't know, I could keep waffling on forever, but the future of Mel is very dependent on who you are reporting to and finding ways to do it creatively and in a way that promotes the principles of the project that you're working on is the most important thing. Being able to creatively articulate value for money and why it's worth continuing, or why it's like sometimes there's bad projects and Mel will reveal you shouldn't be continuing them. So being able to get creative and, thinking about what's development for, what's Mel for.
mm. Accountability will play a very big role in the current world order as
Hmm.
well. So Mel is not going anywhere. That's my
Yeah,
personal
no,
take on it.
Mel will always be around. We might
Yeah,
get replaced, who
with
knows,
some
by AI,
different
but
terminology or something, but Mel
yeah,
is there, will be there.
yeah, they're always going to want to know if the dollars are making sense.
Absolutely. Before going on to the next section, which is all about questions from audience, last question in this segment. For those who are planning a career in M&E, what are the key skills and competencies one should develop?
Qualitative research, also quantitative research. Some in the Mel field are proponents of randomized controlled trials. That's not really my ball game. If you want to work on those, then you would need to be good at quantitative research. But being able to design good research tools, really critical skill. Program management. Like Mel is not just showing up, doing a survey, and leaving. You have the whole Mel program that you need to manage. So being able to think really depends on who you are and how you think, but being able to think, okay, if I have a report due in 6 months, I need to have data analysis done by X. And that means I need to have data collection done by this date. And that means I need to have the tools validated by, being able to do program management is really important. Being able to design good programs, really important. Also, facilitation is a really important skill that I've never really done any formal training in, but being able to lead workshops and being able to be very proactive about managing power and personalities in those workshops is a really important skill, and it's something that I'm always learning. I'm not great at interrupting people to ask them to share the floor, and that, sometimes enables power structures to be replicated in the workshops I'm facilitating. So the soft skills of facilitation, being able to have meetings, being able to respond kind of on the fly to uncomfortable questions. There's a lot of soft skills, but the technical skills, knowing how to do theory of change, knowing how to make a ML framework, knowing the types of indicators that you may or may not want to use. Something that I was not expecting is how much I have to look at the DFAT monitoring and evaluation standards.
Yeah.
I have a printed copy, it's enormous, and I have that next to my desk every day. I also have to look at the specific indicators that DFAT requires for aid programs and the individual technical notes for each of those indicators. That's very much because I'm reporting to DFAT. Having different donors means you have different requirements, but knowing where to look, like having good research skills, which you all have through being students because you have to find articles to reference and sources to use. That's just as relevant in my job as it is when you're a student.
Thank you, Elena. We move on to the questions. I'm aware of the timing. We have 20 more minutes. So first question from audience, what are the challenges of your work in a male-dominated society?
Look, working in patriarchy and capitalism is the reason that we need development, in my humble feminist opinion. So that's, why we're all here. The social sector, social justice sector is a very female-dominated sector in Australia and around the world. Aid and development, very female-dominated in terms of quantity of people who work in the sector, but in terms of positions of power, I think we all know not female-dominated. But power and patriarchy, regardless of the gender of the people that you're working with, influence the ways of working. And when you're working for a nonprofit, that means there's never enough funding and you're always being asked to do way more than is possible. It means that you do not have time to do professional development. It means that you will be likely managed by someone simply because that person has been there for 3 to 5 years, not because they necessarily have the skills to be a manager. Yeah. Like my specific area of expertise is gender-based violence, and I previously worked at Australia's peak body for perpetrators. So my focus for 3 years was on men who use family violence. So, I mean, yeah, that's a tough space to work in. Not a lot of great news coming out of that. Yeah, I mean, working in the patriarchy we all do it every day, regardless of the job you work in. Our systems of valuation for what qualities we privilege has been determined by capitalism and the patriarchy, and that is hard to negotiate, but we all do it on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's why knowing your values is really important, because I've been incredibly lucky in that I've been able to work. Every job has been at a really values-aligned organization. And I know that as a person and a worker, I would not be able to manage working in a place where I felt like I didn't align, at least in some part, with my colleagues. Clear Horizon was founded by Jess Dart. It's a women-owned, women-operated organization, very female-dominated. In my team of 12-ish, we have one man, I believe. And that, so I've always worked in pretty women-dominated workplaces, but I've always also specifically worked on issues of gender-based violence. So I don't know, you got to keep yourself safe however you do that.
Thank you, Elena. How do I make the most of transferring my skills and experience from studying in Australia, both from my major and my internship experience, I may seek out, that's what written in brackets, to become useful in the context of my own home country, example, Indonesia? How do I find career opportunities once I return?
Finding career opportunities in Indonesia is not something I can really speak to, but I know what I did here, and I've kind of already touched on this, but follow up with people. While you're here, look at the organizations or government agencies that you might want to work at in Indonesia and just find someone to email. Maybe message someone on LinkedIn. Being able to say, hi, my name's Elena. I'm a student of development studies in Australia. I'll finish in blah, blah. I'm really interested in gender-based violence work, and I'm currently an intern at, I don't know, IWDA. I would love to know more about your work and any way that I could be involved. Like you can just, that sets you up to say, this is who I am. This is what I'm interested in. I want to be part of your team. And people like that. You'll get a lot of non-responses, um, yeah, but I think set yourself up by knowing who you want to work for. And that might be, I really want to work for Clear Horizon, but I don't have the skills to get hired right now. So my plan is I'll do, X, Y, and Z to build my CV. So you can even LinkedIn stalk the people who work at the places that you want to work at and see what experience they have and think about how you can point yourself in that direction as well.
Our first podcast webinar in this series was about all this thing, and the speaker was from Indonesia. So if you haven't watched it already, go and watch that video. I think that would be helpful. So next question, what statistical tools and techniques do you use for data analysis? Is there any software one needs to be familiar with to develop technical skills for MEL space? How to handle missing or incomplete data?
So are there tools you need to know how to use? No, because it depends on the type of job you're doing. Obviously, Microsoft Suite, good to be at least able to use those tools. Again, I'm a qualitative researcher. I know how to use NVivo pretty well, but Clear Horizon doesn't use NVivo. They use something else that I haven't used yet. So I wouldn't, unless you know that you want to be a quant researcher looking at very large longitudinal data sets. If that's the case, then learn how to use R or Strata or Stata. Or I'm interested in learning how to use Power BI for data visualization because I think that's pretty cool. But that's not a job requirement. That's just, I think it would be cool to know how to do that. I can do, again, like minimal Excel statistical analysis, but unless you're working on a randomized control trial or working, maybe in health with very large data sets, you're not going to be running regressions. I've honestly learned how to do that when I was 16, has not come up once in the intervening years. So I think, again, think about the type of job you want to have and then learn how to use that software. But I've applied for a few jobs where knowing how to use Stata or R maybe would have been beneficial, but I've never not gotten a job because I didn't know how to use a piece of software as far as I'm aware.
And focus on your strengths, and you can always learn even after getting a new job.
Yeah, you
So
can always learn.
for
And your
ex
job, if you really need to know how to do something, they will pay for you to learn how to do it, or
that's
at
right.
least give you the study leave to do it. Like, it's not, unless again, you know that you want to be a quant researcher, don't show up with my skill set because they will say you have none of the required skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even Power BI, like I started learning Power BI after joining this job, So yeah, and there are a lot of free resources available on YouTube. If you're too interested, just go and check it out and you can learn it yourself over the weekend. It's time to address the big elephant in the room, Elena. It's artificial intelligence.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on AI and its contribution to Mel?
This is an interesting question, and one that we're kind of talking about at Clear Horizon. So a caveat, I'm like a pretty anti-AI person in general. I'm a pretty like tech skeptic person, partly because it doesn't come naturally to me, partly because I'm skeptical of software that is developed in a bubble predominantly by men who are not engaged in the world in the way that we perhaps are. So when we talk about AI, there's like a lot of different things. There's some great AI tools that can help you make really cool charts, way better than Smart Chart in Word. That is a very useful and practical thing for Mel. But you need to think just in the way that when you choose your data storage platform or your survey tool, you need to think about data security, and that is incredibly important for AI. So if you're uploading transcripts from key informant interviews and it has information about people's lives, which it will because they're transcripts, and you're asking ChatGPT to analyze for you, is that data going into the training for ChatGPT? Where is it stored? Is it stored in the US? Clear Horizon doesn't use software where the data is stored in the US. You really have to think about what you're expecting out of if we're talking about a large language model, what you're expecting out of it. It will definitely be much faster than you, but it can't pick up nuance. It can't pick up sarcasm. It doesn't know about the context of the people that you're interviewing. I also love writing, and so I would never give the best part of my job to a robot. Like we had a meeting the other week to talk about how we use AI for new starters, and someone was saying, oh, I use it to do spell check and to write emails. And I was like, first of all, Microsoft does spell check for a lot less of the electricity. And also, I like writing. It's how I think. I'm not going to ask a robot to do that for me. So it really depends on your preferences. I think there's also the ethical question of, yes, data storage, how these models are trained, what they're used for. Are you going to be giving these models data that will ultimately be used to build weapons, to be used as justification for all manner of evils, but also the environmental impact of the servers that run these large language models is growing at an almost inconceivable rate. And so I think yeah, sure, it might write an email for you, but at what cost? And part of development is not destroying the planet. If we don't have a planet to live on, we can't possibly have gender equality or a well-built road. So I'm not the blue sky AI person. There are other people who are. I think there's a time and a place for it, and I have not yet found that time and place. There are things that I've done at work where afterwards someone has been like, oh, you should have just used ChatGPT. It's like, well, sure. Maybe I could have used ChatGPT to find me the 17 logos of these different ministries that we work with, but it meant I got to go to their websites and read a little bit about them. So yeah, like there's a time and a place. I'm sure that I will become more accustomed to using it. I'm sure that 50 years ago, if you had asked someone who worked in Mel, how do you feel about computers? They would have felt as skeptical as I do about AI. And here we are on video call. So, times move on, but good Mel is based in context. It's rooted in understanding the people and the programs that you're working with, and ChatGPT or whatever Copilot can't do that, in my opinion. I could be wrong in the future, but if I'm wrong, that's fine.
Thank you, Elena, on your insights. Just one thing from my end, like if you're a newcomer in this field and you don't know how to navigate AI, I think a lot of peak bodies in monitoring and evaluation and learning, they have come out with their guidelines. I know Australian Evaluation Society has a guideline of their own, and other organizations in the US and other parts of the world. Go and read them out and make yourself aware. That is very important because data storage is a big issue. And, like we are talking about lives of people, personal lives of people, and we need to be very careful about sharing those data, so you need to be very cautious when you're using AI in your work in the Mel space. Thank you, Elena, for your insights. I don't think we have much time. Maybe one question. This comes from Deborah Cummins. Any tips on strengthening the internal learning element of Mel?
So when I worked at IWDA, part of my role was kind of supporting with our internal MEL. And kind of regardless of whether it's internal or external MEL, you really have to work with the non-MEL people so that they understand the value of what you're doing. Because for a lot of people, MEL feels like this annoying thing they have to do at the end of the year that they forgot about. And so now they have to do a bunch of data entry. So strengthening the learning culture from MEL, a lot of that has to come from the top. If you're just the MEL officer and you have a leadership that's tepid on changing workplace culture or ways of working, then you can have the best MEL in the world, the best M&E in the world, and it won't go anywhere. So you really need to make sure that you have the system that works for the organization or company that you're in. You need to make sure that the way recommendations are provided is in a very strengths-based way. Telling people they're bad at their jobs and they're mean has probably never made anyone be like, great, I love that, thank you. I feel great about continuing to work here, and I definitely believe you. So you need to find a way to convey what might be tricky or sensitive information in a way that is strengths-based and still is positive and is looking at what we can do. It's really hard if you're working in an underfunded nonprofit to do internal MEL and also to implement those changes, because odds are the MEL will show you have high staff burnout, high staff turnover, low job satisfaction rates, and that's because people are being asked to do a huge amount of work without the resources, which means pay, but also the workplace safety to actually do those things. So internal MEL in nonprofits and community organizations is often really hard because the changes that are recommended are structural and they're not within the sphere of influence of the MEL team. So being really specific about what is in your control as an organization and as individuals, I think, is important. And all of the stuff that you would have learned in any monitoring and evaluation subjects you would have taken, having those reflection feedback loops, opportunities for reflection with different levels of the organization, creating spaces for people to come together to talk about their reaction to MEL reports, is also really important. Embedding the learning means people need to know about it. So you have to find a lot of ways to share that information in a way that works for different types of people.
Thank you, Elena. I am conscious about the time. The clock is ticking one, so we all need to wrap this conversation quickly. I thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation. Thanks for being so candid and giving us a sneak peek to your world or our world of MEL. And I look forward to having this future conversations with you again in some other space or in this space only. And to everyone else, thank you for attending this talk today. And if you want to follow us, please follow our LinkedIn page and Twitter page for future updates on our webinars and other information. You can also check our website. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
So much, everyone.